Sometimes my photos are boring. Same old location, same old compositions. Today I'm visiting a favourite location, and there's a good chance the photos will disappoint once again.
Well, yes, they are. Well, not all of them. Some of them are okay. But the photograph I've just taken adds nothing to my portfolio, nothing to my understanding of photography, nothing to my love of this location and my understanding of the landscape. It's the same old that I've always done. But does it have to be that way? I'm sure it doesn't. So let's stop, rewind. But it doesn't have to be that way, does it? Your photos don't have to be boring. You don't have to fall out of love with the favourite locations that you've come to know. But it's not enough just to think about doing something different. You have to do something different. So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 ways in which you can change the way you work. These are all ways that you could use with your own photography. Ways that can bring life back into the locations which you've come to love, and you can feel invigorated again and want to get up in the morning and take those photographs. So come on, let's go and see what we can find. One of the things that can be really hard is making that transition from taking the photographs that you've always taken to, look at the state of my hat, to taking the ones that really sort of get you interested in your photography again. It's certainly something I struggle with sometimes. I've just been looking at the photograph I took last on the viewfinder on the back of the camera. I think this is the first tip from this video to take away, because I said I was going to give you some practical ways of how you can find some better photographs. Just been zooming into the viewfinder in the original picture that I took, and I've just been picking out some bits of that photograph which I really like. And I found a part, I'll tell you what, let me put it up on the screen so I can zoom in and show you it for you. So I found a part down the bottom corner, I think it's the bottom left-hand corner, that really sort of captures one of the elements I like. It's this where the water changes direction and where it's flowing over a rock, and you've got these changes in texture and form of the water itself. So I think I'm going to take that picture now. So I've set the camera up on the tripod, brought it up a bit higher so I'm pointing down at the scene. Now I've zoomed my lens in to 105mm, and that way I'm focusing on that section of the frame that I said I was before. I'll put some viewfinder video up so you can see what I'm looking at. What's really attracted me to it is this diagonal line, like this shelf that's cutting across the frame. And where it's cutting across the frame, we've got these different changing directions of water. With a slow shutter speed, I think this is going to really work quite well. Now I know with the shutter speed that I've got at the moment, 20th a second, f11, it might not be fast enough. So I'm going to get some filters out, pop those on and take the picture, and then I'll show you the finished scene. that's all well and good, zooming in on the back of the frame of the original picture you've taken and finding something. That works really well, and I'm quite pleased with that last photograph. But I'm assuming that you've turned up on location, you even know what to shoot. What about when you turn up and you've been there before and you just can't get inspired and you can't even raise the camera up and look for something to shoot? Well, there is another alternative. How about change the focal length? If you normally shoot with a wide angle lens, shoot telephoto, and if you normally shoot telephoto, shoot wide angle. So my default go-to focal length is about somewhere in the order of, I'd say, 35 to 70 mil. That's my normal range for landscape photography. Funnily enough, that last photograph that I took forced me to shoot at 105 millimeters. And more that I get into my photographs, I am taking photographs with the mid-range or longer range zoom. But I put my 70 to 300 on to see if I can pick out some different subjects that I want to pick out and capture. Let's see what we can find. So I've set up my 300mm lens with the polarizing filter on. It's actually a 70 to 300mm zoom, but I've zoomed right into 300. I've put the polarizing filter on the same as I did with the last picture. It's just cutting down on that sheen in the water. Now this follows on really well from the last tip, because in the last tip we used our original photograph to pick out sections that we liked. But in this one, what I've done is I used the focal length of 300mm and thereabouts to sort of zoom in and out and to scan around the scene and pick out those details. So I've done it in live time really, rather than just looking at something I've already taken. And what this has enabled me to do is find a part of the waterfall that I actually think looks really quite well on its own, so I've narrowed in on that. You'll also see that I've put the camera in the vertical format because it just sort of works a bit better. So I'm going to crop to 5x4, and that's going to lead into the next tip very well. So have a look at this finished image and see what you think of this one. Oh blimey, in the last photograph I was telling you it was getting foggy, now the sun's coming out, it's completely changeable weather. Well, that's good, it adds to a little bit more drama for our photography. I mentioned briefly when I took the last photograph with the 300mm lens on that I was going to change the aspect ratio, and that's another good tip. Now, what do we mean by aspect ratio? Well, most standard digital SLR or mirrorless cameras use a 2:3 aspect ratio. A widescreen TV can be 16:9, and there's a lot of other common ones in between. Now, it's not usual that when we get back home and start processing our images that we do that anyway. We put them up on the computer screen, we want to chop a bit off the top, a bit off the bottom, a bit coming in from the left, and we start changing those aspect ratios. Well, a good way to find different photographs yourself and find those compositions that you wouldn't normally take is to restrict yourself to a different aspect ratio that you wouldn't normally use. So I've decided for my next photograph to do exactly that. One of the beautiful things about the Canon 5D Mark IV that I currently have, and you can do this with a lot of different SLRs as well, is that you can pick an aspect ratio to work in. And I'm going to pick the square aspect ratio. That's 1:1. Which is a very traditional 6x6 as it would have been back in the days of film with our landscape photographers going out with their Hasselblad medium format cameras. So it's a format that I've really enjoyed using a lot more out in the field since we've had this as landscape photographers. So I'm going to drink up some coffee, have some breakfast, and then I'm going to set up my next photograph. I've got a great composition in mind. I've just got to see if it's going to work. Well, I've set the camera up on the tripod in what I think is going to be a reasonably good position for this. And on the 5D Mark IV, you can actually change the aspect ratio. So like I said, I'm going to set that in 1:1 and just set it on that. And then when we go back to the viewfinder, you'll be able to see that it's actually chopped off the sides of the frame, and now we have this square frame to look at on the screen. And that works really well for the composition. What I've done with this composition is I've just tried to sort of have the waterfall coming across on a bit of a diagonal, and I've included a little triangle of sky up at the top, so it just balances with the foreground. And then we've got the tree coming in and the sort of like left hand side, almost central now actually, coming over the top of the river coming through in the background. That's pretty much how our composition works. Using the 2-second timer when I'm taking all of these photos just to make sure the camera doesn't move. Now you'd be quite justified to actually ask the question, well, why are you bothering doing this? Because you could just crop it when you get back home. Well, you're right, I could, but this isn't about doing something after the event. This is about working in a different way out in the field to improve your landscape photography. And I can guarantee that if you work in different aspect ratios, that will enable you to do that. So because I've forced myself to work in a square format and look through and use the viewfinder on the back of the camera, use the LCD screen, sorry, rather than the viewfinder. Although I guess on some mirrorless cameras, the viewfinder would have that feature on it as well. It means that basically you have to think in that format and work in that way. And that's a completely different way of working. And it makes you work in a different way. And I'll guarantee that if you do it that way, that your compositions will be better than had you just cropped them when you got back home. So I'll put this image up and see what you think. It's starting to get quite dull. I'm just hoping that we're not going to end up with a load of rain in a minute, and yeah, hope that's not going to spoil the day for me. I used to be just a black and white photographer, and that came out of the fact that I spent a long time in the darkroom in the days of film, and I became really confident in using that format. In fact, I got to the point, and I'm still at that point now, where I can think in black and white and cancel the colour out and imagine how a finished black and white photograph is going to look. But that's not easy for everybody. So sometimes we overlook it as a possible medium. Rather than visualize an image in black and white, we see everything in colour and we walk past some fantastic opportunities. I don't know if you know this or not, but your SLR or your digital camera, whatever you're using, has probably got a black and white mode, and you can put the screen on black and white. And that enables you to have a good idea of what an image is going to look like in the finished picture. Now, to be honest, when you get into black and white photography, you won't worry about that so much, because the conversion options that you've got inside of Lightroom, Capture One, Affinity, whatever you use, are so good that actually you don't really need to think about it. You can just produce really good images by converting them yourself. And I would argue that converting your black and white images yourself is the right way to go. But for the purposes of this video and giving you some tips, I'm going to take this image as a black and white on the back of the screen, but I am going to convert it inside of Photoshop. First of all, let's set the camera and the composition up. So on my camera, we can set up the LCD screen so it shows black and white. So if we just click on this button here and then go through the various modes, eventually we'll get to monochrome. There we are, set in monochrome. So with the camera set in monochrome now, I can get to look at what picture could look like in black and white. But like I said, I'm going to concentrate really on this just as a guide, and the full conversion is going to be done inside of Photoshop. I'm going to put some viewfinder video up so I can explain the composition to you. So I've set this up with the idea being that the water will flow between this big boulder on the bank on the right hand side down towards the boulders on the left-hand side of the image. And what I'm hoping is that where the water's flowing away from the camera, we're actually going to get a situation where it's that diagonal flow of water that joins the two parts of the image together and draws your eye in. Now what I'm thinking is that because it's in black and white, providing I can get enough contrast out of the scene in processing, it'll actually support that image a bit better than the colour one would and simplify it and make it just about that flow and that direction of that water. So have a look at this final processed image and see what you think about it. I've just taken one more image, which is basically tip 5. It's the last and final image. I decided not to film myself doing it because I wasn't quite sure it was ever going to work out. And that's what that last tip is. It's experiment. Don't be afraid to give it a go, and even if it doesn't work out, you've learnt something. And if it's the surface of the water with a few bubbles floating across it that captures your eye at that moment in time, just see what you can make of it. I'm sure I could have made a lot more of this photograph, but I just didn't have time to hang about and do it anymore. I've got a date with a roast chicken at home, so I need to get off and get back for that. But I'll put this last image up and you can have a look at it and see what you think. But remember, that's the last tip, and that's what I want you to take away. Don't be afraid to experiment and try different things. And if you do that all the time, pushing those boundaries of your own photography, you will improve and you will get better. So that's all from me for now. Enjoy this last image. I'll see you on the next video.
Marmite, hate it or love it. Yesterday I couldn't even process this image. Today I love it, and it took me less than 5 minutes. I call it the river X-ray. It represents the contrast in the many states of water and the hidden swirling energy below the surface. Go out and experiment. You just never know what you're going to get.